dear guests, welcome to our last session, today's last session. It is my pleasure to present you Christopher Volpe. He has been our partner for our Sailing to Madness new essays on Moby Dick book project. He has organized art classes with our students, Department of American Culture and Literature students in the last fall semester. And the session you have just seen before Chris was a project finalized by him. And we are grateful and thankful to his efforts and all the inspiration he gave to our students. Let me introduce him first of all. Christopher Volpe is an artist, writer, and teacher with an academic background in both American literature and visual art. His work is held in the permanent collections of Smith College, the Whistler House Museum, and the New Bedford Whaling Museum. Grants and awards include the Saint Botolph Club Foundation, Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Arts, Assets for Artists, and the New Hampshire State Council on the Arts. With degrees from the University of New Hampshire and Stony Brook University, he has taught painting, literature, mythology, and the history of art at various colleges and universities. His title is Loomings, and also entitling his artwork. And floor is yours, dear Chris.
Thank you, Yonca. I will share my screen and start up this presentation that I have for you. This was the initial presentation that I used to bring the students together on this idea, which was to respond to Moby Dick through visual art in a way that that inspired thoughtful consideration of the underlying themes in the book and the ways in which it functions, and the way the whale and the ocean can function as metaphors in Moby Dick and also beyond Moby Dick. For instance, this is a painting of mine from the series called Loomings, which, as Yongcha mentioned, is a series of paintings I've been working on. Have been shown in various museums and galleries and universities here in the United States. And I am using variety of mixed materials, including tar, oil paint, and gold leaf to make these. And I will talk about that as well. But here's an example of a work that alludes to 19th century whaling and or even just commerce or colonialization by situating this ghostly tall ship barely visible in this mass of nebulous atmosphere. We have a dark sea and a corrosive space that seems to wish to dissolve the object of attention, which of course is the ship in the center. And the ship stands for humanity and the voyage, what Virginia Woolf called the voyage out, which is our need to grasp and to map our relationship to the real, our desperate attempt to journey to a place where consciousness seems no longer at odds with the universe that has created us. I think that Moby Dick is largely about the disjunction between human and natural, and my paintings reflect that, and so did some of the paintings that you've seen from the students. So this is a way of taking the underlying themes of Moby Dick, the destruction of the ship, of the mercilessness of the ocean, the vastness of space, and the futility of human endeavor, and extending it beyond the specific narrative instances of the novel and into more universal archetypal symbols and imagery. So I first asked the students to view some of the most significant art related to Moby Dick from the 20th century to the contemporary, and to think about how each of these artists embodied the spirit of Moby Dick without necessarily illustrating the novel. In other words, plugging into the deeper themes and extending them creatively through new art, through new modes of personal expression, which is precisely what you just seen. Our overarching, let's say one of our tutelary gods was Emerson. For some of his quotes, books are for nothing but to inspire, and one must be an inventor to read well, which I thought had a nice dovetail with some of the continental theory about the death of the author and the reliance of the text upon the reader for its assembly of meaning, but in a more romantic, sort of empowering way, I thought, which is kind of interesting. So Emerson thinks of the book as a battery that we plug into for our own imaginings, an elemental force that could change minds, change lives, and change the world, one viewer or reader at a time. And so we hoped to hijack some of this creativity in our work. So they used the book to create something new with a theme related to the book, but not illustrative. And I gave a list of some themes, but the students were already well ahead of me on this because of the excellent teaching that EDGE University has been doing. They were very easy to, it was easy for them to see how a theme could translate into new creative work. They were not thinking literally right from the get-go. They were thinking metaphorically, which is a great advantage. So my own fascination with Moby Dick as an artist began with Melville's description of a seascape and its strangeness. It is a picture representing a ship in a hurricane with a whale desperately trying to leap over the ship and becoming impaled on the masts. A very strange, surreal image. And the painting itself is quite strange and surreal. The way Melville describes it, it sounds very much like a painting by J.M.W. Turner, the English romantic. He calls the painting a boggy, soggy, squitchy picture, truly. He's responding to the nebulous and abstract quality of paintings just like this that you're looking at. These are seascapes, and yet they are depictions of elemental forces at work. And in the bottom right, humanity facing those forces. There's a vortex of energy, a dark energy in that painting on the lower right. And there is a ship right here in the center, hard to see, but just as Melville describes, it's foundering in a hurricane, and there is even a portentous black mass, suspiciously shaped like a whale with an open mouth, hovering above the ship as though it is leaping over it. Very likely that Melville was referring directly to this painting, of which he owned a print in that description. Let me show you. Well, I'll show you this. So this is one of my tar paintings, and this is another Turner painting on the right. And I wanted to draw a parallel between this painting and the Turner, but also to talk about the way seascapes in general and Moby Dick offer artists a abstraction, another way to refer to uncertainty, the loss of solid ground, the transposition of near and far, and the unsettling of the elements that comes with any description or experience of long voyages at sea, particularly in the 19th century when humans were so at the mercy of the so-called whims of nature. We talked about some of the abstract expressionist responses to the novel, as you see here. Jackson Pollock, but also several others. And we talked about the importance of the novel for the abstract expressionist movement. There was a constant reference to the novel among the painters of the abstract expressionist school in New York in the 1950s, which changed the face of Western art eventually. Moby Dick had an important, a small but important role to play in the creation of this art. Almost all of the artists created something in homage directly to the novel, and they spoke of it as a kind of Bible of the untethering of art from representation, in the way that the novel itself uses the metaphor of the ocean as a trope for uncertainty and peril. So this is one of my first paintings from the series called Loomings. And as it is my interpretation of the Spouter Inn painting that we just talked about, that Melville describes in his chapter, The Spouter Inn. That's the tavern in which this painting Melville describes is hanging in the novel. And as you see, I have also a portentous black mass in the center, in the shape of a whale, being impaled on these three masts. And below it is a ship, barely visible, foundering in this chaos. I'll talk a little bit about the materials too here. This is a second one that I did, also a painting on the Spouter Inn theme. Also barely visible is a ship and the giant mast taking the center stage here, but very abstract. And I place it in a 19th century frame to create that telescoping of time between the 19th century metaphors of Moby Dick and the 21st century metaphors of climate change. Why do I use, again, all of this is tar. This is tar that I find very challenging but rewarding to work with. And I grew up next to, when I was a boy, I lived near this oil tank holding this oil and gas holding facility. This is oil coming in from overseas and landing in the United States and being stored for distribution. And my house was about a block away from this when I was young. So I spent time literally in the shadow of the fossil fuel industry as a child. And tar, to me, has associations of childhood, but also of, again, climate change, because the material is literally a byproduct of the fossil fuel refinement process. And it's a material as a metaphor. It is inescapably toxic and heavy, dark. It is viscous. It wants like to pull us down. And I try to exploit and bring out these qualities in the paint when I'm using it to make the paintings in this Loomings series. So I'm going to switch over to a second slide deck here where I can talk a little bit more about some more of these paintings and show them a little more in depth. So please bear with me for a moment. So other personal reasons for using tar is that it's a primordial base organic material, deeply metallic black, and yet when thinned or mixed with paint, which I do sometimes, it becomes a warm brown earthy tone. And the parallel between oil drilling and whaling is more than fanciful, since Moby Dick, after all, is the chronicle of a disastrous whaling voyage. And whaling was the major American global industry at that time. It was about energy. It was oil was being used as fuel for lighting and particularly for the factories that were coming up to speed during the Industrial Revolution, which was going full throttle at this time. It was only a few years after the publication of Moby Dick in 1859 that the first oil was being pumped out of the ground in Pennsylvania, and oil from the ground replaced oil from the sea as our primary source of cheap energy, which has driven not only the industrialization and technological advances of our time, but also the degradation of our planet. The colors of climate change, of the fossil fuel industry, are those of my paintings, with no coincidence there, because I am using the same material that's being burned here, is being used to create a ship image here. So the parallels are built into the materials. And of course, the context for the art has to make that apparent. So therefore, the titles of all of these paintings refer to chapters in Moby Dick. Particularly, this one's called, the lower right is, I'll show you it. This is my painting called "T'Gallant Sails," which is one of the title of a chapter in Moby Dick. Here I'm trying to make the most of the ocean as a metaphor for climate change, for the chaos of environmental damage, and the metaphor of Moby Dick, self-destruction, the ship that will inevitably drive itself down. This particular painting is a riff on a painting by the 19th century American painter known, his name is Albert Pinkham Ryder, who isn't terribly well known outside of the outside of American artistic circles, but whose work was and is very seminal in some of the more avant-garde American art. So this is a painting on top by Ryder called "The Canal," and the painting of "T'Gallant Sails" below was a deliberate echo of the painting by Ryder, not only in the forms, as the parallel of the curving light piercing through the darkness, but in what's called the chiaroscuro, which is the stark contrast of the dark and the light. It's this that gives a painting by Ryder a kind of otherworldly quality, and it's this chiaroscuro, this dark light, pervades Moby Dick as well, pervades the novel. In fact, a lot of the paintings and illustrations of Moby Dick have been in monochrome, have been playing up this dark and light intermingling. And it's particularly apt, I think, for the imagery of Moby Dick to be in this stark black and white. One of the 19th century, 20th century abstract expressionists who was influenced by Moby Dick as well was Robert Motherwell. And below you see a famous painting of Motherwell's called Elegy for the Spanish Republic, where it's actually one of a series of very large scale paintings. But the prototype of that painting was actually a painting called The Tomb of Captain Ahab from 1950. And we have a quote from Motherwell about what this meant to him. And he says that the black in Moby Dick in Melville goes deeper and darker. It menaces like a black gullet, and is a kind of metaphor for the void. He says, I use black and white, not in the way most people think of it, but as a color of non-being. So he says, what is more natural than a passionate interest in juxtaposing black and white, being and non-being, life and death? So there's this Manichaean dichotomy of dark and light, which runs through American literature and painting. It's the opposition of good and evil, but also of being and non-being. And to play with this at an elemental scale. So these things feed into my series. This is a painting called Horizon Sails. And once again, a deep, dark sea composed of tar and a ship faded on the horizon, which is troubled by also a very dark, brooding sky and a hazy, nebulous light. And the scale here is meant to suggest the threat of darkness overwhelming the ship on its voyage, whether it's the ship of state, whether it's humanity, whether it's just a ship. It's periled. Some of the paintings from this series took on a more 19th century aspect, such as this one, which is titled Southwester. It's a ship being torn apart by a storm. And this is entirely in tar without any oil paint. So this canvas was initially covered with tar, which comes in a bucket and is the same substance used for coating roofs and other ships and things that need to be waterproof. So it's simply a subtractive process of removing the tar and then drawing with it back into the atmosphere created by the space created, the illusion of space created by actually just removing the tar. This is a painting done similar process, but also with the addition of oil paint in this area here to bring out the light, and a little bit down in the right-hand corner. But mostly it's just dark clouds of poisonous smoke billowing into the air, much the way a modern smokestack does. But this is also titled Trying Out, and also refers to a chapter in Moby Dick in which Melville describes the process of processing whales for their oil on board the ships. The ships functioned like factories, and they very efficiently cut and dried and boiled the whales into oil and then discarded the rest of the carcass. And it was a very messy process, very bilious, dark smokes, would almost the way Melville describes it, as though a scene from Dante's Hell. And these are several other paintings that all seem to refer to the same theme, and also a little bit of this shadowy darkness that's issuing from the ship. So not just the ship being overwhelmed, but the ship contributing to its demise. So this one is called Any Human Thing, which is a quote to, which is a reference to a quote of that's in Moby Dick. And the subtitle is The Whaler as Derrick. So you see here a small ship, a whale ship, but it is issuing the dark clouds of the burning flesh of the whale into the sky, much the way an oil derrick would shower crude oil into the air because of the massive pressure that it's under. When the well was struck, when they struck oil, it would be forced out of the top of the derrick and create a kind of spout, almost like a whale spout, a fountain, a storm of oil going up and then falling back down. And so I tried to conflate Melville's imagery of the whaler processing the whales on board the ship with the fossil fuel industry's spewing of contaminants into the air, which then fall back down, rain back down, and gather like a dark, poisonous void opening beneath the ship. One of the other sub-series within the series was called Westward, and there were about a dozen paintings named Westward, titled Westward, that related to the Loomings series. And they're only very loosely related to the novel because they do show generally 19th century ships. But the term Westward, I hoped, simply cast a wide net over the entire Western colonial enterprise and its consequences. Here, there was a 19th century American propaganda painting called Westward, the Course of Empire. And you see it on the right. And it's a ridiculous pastiche of American exceptionalism. And it was ridiculed even in the 19th century, or perhaps critiqued is a better word, by Andrew Melrose, who created another painting called Westward, the Star of Empire Takes Its Way, which was the name of the first painting, which is in the US Capitol building, by the way, still. Melrose's answer to that painting at the lower right was to show the train coming, a steam engine, which was all about manifest destiny, uniting the east and western edges of the United States through the colonization and extinction of indigenous peoples and the destruction of nature to make way for industry. So he has shown us the blinding light of a train barreling toward some deer, which are trying to get across the tracks in time. And beyond, and there's a very gloomy, dark sky. And I appreciate that as a painter of dark skies myself. And also on the left, there's a clear-cut field where there's nothing but a few straggling trees left and a settler's cabin with smoke coming out of the chimney. And all of these tree stumps are left in place to emphasize the encroachment of humanity upon nature. And beyond, I mean, that is such an anodyne way to put it. One would really need to call it like this steamrolling of nature to make way for capitalism. That's what was being critiqued even in the 19th century. That's what I'm trying to critique in these paintings called Westward. And I refer in the title, Westward, the Course of Empire Takes Its Way, to that series of paintings. And this is a close-up of the ship in the middle of this painting here. By the way, that is gold leaf raining down from the sky here. Also a reference to capitalism, gold being the goal of Western colonialism from the 17th and 18th century on, and gold which continues to bewitch us today into the destruction of our planet. I also tried to make the ship look a little bit like an oil tanker. So less like a 19th century whaling ship with the distinct banks of sails and more like a large mass. But it's a very subtle and it's secondary to the overall message of the ship being lost in this torrent of what looks like fire falling from the air, but is gold, and what looks like storm clouds, but is tar, fossil fuel. One of the largest paintings in the series at 4 by 5 feet was called Dive and carried this quote from Melville. O Ahab, what shall be grand in thee? It needs must be plucked from the skies and dived for in the deep and featured in the unbodied air. This particular quote seemed apt to me just because the painting itself seems to refer at once to the ocean as well as the sky. So it has a celestial, almost heavenly appeal with the rays of light, almost like a reference to divine light. But it is under the sea, and those aren't clouds, but bubbles from a large mass which is sinking, which is going down. And that could be the whale diving, or it could be the ship, the Pequod, as it sinks to the bottom. It is left ambiguous. This is simply the suspension between depth and the void and transcendence and the light. Because ultimately that's where we are. That is our situation. We are suspended between the light and the dark. This is another large painting from the series, almost a companion piece to this one. Whereas this is mostly light, in this one, it's mostly dark. The title of this is Surely All This Is Not Without Meaning. And this painting came about quite unexpectedly. I was just playing with the large dark mass, and I painted the foreground over it and realized how much it looked like a gaping mouth. It looked like a void. So I went back to Moby Dick, and the first time Ahab sees the whale, he makes a point of talking about the glittering mouth yawning beneath the boat like an open-doored marble tomb. So I loved the idea of the open tomb and a metaphor of the void. And the Jonah, I guess the Jonah myth is somehow packed in here too, because this is very much a swallowing. We're very much falling into this open mouth. One of the gold leaf paintings was called Corpus Santos, and it refers to the chapter in Moby Dick in which Ahab is rallying the crew like a demagogue to follow his mad scheme of revenge and madness against the whale, this voyage to madness. And the St. Elmo's fire, which is a phenomenon of atmospheric electricity, overtakes the masts of the ship, and there are seeming fireballs and bolts of lightning traveling among the masts, and Ahab makes it seem like a celestial sign, a sign from the gods that, or from God or the devil, that the fate is of the Pequod is sealed, and that the crew members have no choice but to follow him. And I very much like this quote from the novel that I append to this painting. It's Ahab speaking to the strange phenomenon. O thou founding fire, thou hermit immemorial, thou too hast thy incommunicable riddle, thy unparticipated grief. That incommunicable riddle, for me, is the heart of the novel, and it is the heart of our fascination, or of the 19th century romantic fascination with the ocean. The ocean stands for the shifting ground as opposed to the steady ground. It is what can't be spoken as opposed to what can. It's the whiteness of the whale, which is the absence of color. And it's the inscrutable nature of the crisis of climate change. Ahab's use of the word inscrutable. What nameless, inscrutable, unearthly thing is it that he says that commands me? So that Ahab acts against all natural lovings and longings, pushing and crowding and jamming myself on all the time. This acting against one's own agency, by some, as if controlled by some inscrutable, unknowable force. This, I think, is the deeper message that Moby Dick and I'm hoping some of my paintings try to convey, this sense of helplessness before our fate. The Anthropocene that we have brought about, this new age of the human deformation of the planet, is something we are incapable of fully comprehending and incapable of doing anything about. It's inscrutable in the sense that Ahab says Moby Dick is inscrutable. It's climate change is a hyperobject, something that we perceive but cannot fully comprehend. And so I see Moby Dick as about, and this metaphor of the ocean as being about the limits of human agency, the limits of human knowledge and perception and action. It's the sea, perhaps, that will eventually overwhelm humanity, the sea from which we came, the sea that is rising inexorably. The ocean currents are changing. This will have vast implications for the future of the human race. Like Ahab, we feel without agency in this crisis, driven by self-destructive forces, but forces we cannot see much or name, much less do anything to avert. This is one of the darkest paintings in the series in my mind. It's called Argonautica, and it's also titled Dutchman. The myth of the Dutchman, the ship that sails and forever around the world, ghost captained, appearing to sailors. When it appears to sailors in a storm in the 19th century, it was heralded as an ominous sign that the ship was in peril. So hence the allusion to Dutchman, but also a wonderful quote from Melville. Yes, the world's a ship on its passage out. It's one of the least referential and most abstract paintings in the series, where I really tried to let the inscrutable nature of the heart of Moby Dick and of this crisis take control, much the way the very first painting of the series, that Melville talks about in the book, the painting of the Spouter Inn, it is inscrutable. It's hard to see what is happening in that painting, just as it is hard to see what is happening in our world at any given moment. And I'm challenging with this painting. I think I return to that first notion of the painting as challenge. Can you even decipher what is shown here? It's left ambiguous. It's the viewer is rudderless before a painting like this. There's the suggestion perhaps of a ship on the right-hand side. There's what looks like a mast, but could also be a cross, or could be nothing at all. Could be simply marks made with tar on a canvas. Finally, I think I would like to just leave this presentation with the question of art in the Anthropocene. I see art as being really about shared experience. I mean, from the cave paintings to abstract expressionism to conceptual art and participatory art, in which artists directly involve the viewer and multiple viewers in the creation of the work. Art is about shared experience. It's about bringing people together, a way of being together in community, in the presence of things that frighten us, or bewitch us, or haunt us, or delight us. Art is that coming together around fundamental human experiences. So what happens to art in the Anthropocene when one of the major human experiences is flight from nature and from ourselves and from the fate we are creating for ourselves daily and doing nothing to avert, as hard as we know we should? I have been working with this sense of terrible beauty in my own work. I think beauty is one of the least talked about aspects of art today. It's a bad word in the world, the art world. It's seen as fraught with enlightenment, overreach, and bias. And so beauty gets a very bad name and is no longer part of the discourse of contemporary criticism. Nonetheless, artists the world over engage it constantly. I would suggest that what we need is a new vocabulary of the aesthetic. So I'm working with these terms: terrible beauty, a kind of beauty that still captivates and lures us in. I think that I try to make my paintings beautiful, and yet this is a beauty that doesn't lull us into a sense of complacency or comfort, and it doesn't sugarcoat the darker realities of human experience, but in fact engages them directly. the tar in, incorporates this negative experience and also affords a kind of beauty, a disturbing beauty that we can, but that also attracts and compels and allures us and enchants us at the same time. And that this is a way of bringing the community and the communication and of art and the conversation around art to engage with the difficult truths of our time. Why would art do this? Because art really does change the world, even if it does so one mind at a time. Art, as you saw in all of the work from the students in the previous presentation, Yonsha's students were able to use art to create conversation around difficult subjects, alternative narratives, and art makes visible things that we are not necessarily able or willing to face. Art makes sense of the senseless, and art recycles the culture's toxins, sometimes literally. Here's a quote from a journalist who is very critical of capitalism in general and of the Western media narratives that go for mainstream news today. She says, seeing is all that's required. If enough people could clearly see what is going on in their world, in their government, and in themselves, the shift into a healthy and harmonious functioning would immediately change from seemingly impossible to self-evidently inevitable. And with that hopeful message, I think I'll yield the floor.
Thank you, Chris, for this presentation. And once again, yeah. Once again, I want to thank you for your contributions to our projects and the inspiration you gave to our students for their artworks. Floor is open to your questions and comments to our artists. Also, our guests who have attended the session online, your questions and comments are also welcome.
I have a question.
Yes.
Of course.
Wait for the mic. Okay.
You showed us a couple paintings by Franz Klein in there, as an abstract painter in the 50s, if I'm not wrong. He used to paint with house paint, not like art paint. And that was pretty industrial, and his paintings were pretty much like figures of people getting trapped in like you know, train track, like railroads and like bridges, steel bridges, like
Yeah.
stuff that like back in the day was blooming in the American industry. Maybe were you influenced?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's a great call. I grew up in Long Island, New York, like I said, and it was about 35 minutes from New York City, 35 miles, I should say, about an hour because of the traffic, but close enough to the city to get into New York and to see the paintings in person at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Museum of Modern Art. And Franz Klein's paintings were among the ones that most impressed me. Jackson Pollock and Franz Klein and Motherwell, but really Klein, exactly as you say, he used industrial materials to create these forms that reference the infrastructure of industry, bridges, train trestles, skyscrapers, but they also sometimes look like they're in ruins, which I find interesting as well. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Franz Klein.
Thank you so much for this beautiful presentation and for sharing your paintings with them. I find them very captivating. You use the term terrible beauty. Your terrible beauty is indeed beautiful. But having said that, I know people are different. I know that the content that you're dealing with, when you refer to climate change, to the whaling industry and all that, is very dark and gloomy. But don't you think that as an artist, it's important to also talk about how you can bring about change in the world, to bring a light to hope? I know it's difficult to bring some hope into this gloomy whaling issue, but then again, I think there's a need for some light out there in the darkness so that you can inspire people. You can make a call for action. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not an artist, but as a consumer of your paintings, I would want to see a little bit of light and a little bit of color in your tar, so that we can inspire people to do something about this situation. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've thought about that many times. I mean, I've ruminated about that. Is it too gloomy? What change won't necessarily happen from simply pointing to a problem. There have to be solutions suggested. I don't know what those solutions are, but I totally agree with you, and it's a little unnerving to me. And frankly, I get tired of making such dark paintings. I want to use color again, and so I've been looking for ways to do that. I may just, I may eventually just stop the series and move on to something else. But right now, I'm kind of trying to do a kind of hybrid sort of thing where I'm bringing color in. And let me show you what I'm talking about. I have a slide here. Since you asked that question, desktop. But anyway, so this is bringing some color in. This is called Search, and this is constructed three-dimensionally. I have two wooden panels. The sides are painted with black acrylic, but around here is the underlying panel is tar, just like the Loomings series. It's tar that's been applied and then removed, but over top of it is situated an oil painting with a little hint of color. I've got a little blue in there, and this is oil paint with just a small amount of tar mixed in to get that sepia tone, but mostly it is oil, and therefore I can use color. And here on the right is a close-up of detail of the lower right-hand corner, where there are 3 seagulls that are flying. And by calling it Search, I'm hoping to suggest the search for a home, the search for rest. I don't know how inspiring that is, but at least I'm making an effort to use color.
It's beautiful. It's just my kind of thing. I think that's the way forward.
Awesome.
For you, for humanity, for everyone. Keep it up. Thank you.
I will. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to add some comments as well. I wanted to talk about the terrible beauty as well, but first I'd like to mention the use of tar. I love the way you use tar in your paintings, because it is such a major material that was used in the 19th century, and especially in the whaling industry and in the ships as well. to see this kind of material that is often used in that industry transformed into a work of art is, I think, really inspiring, and I really loved it. And then I wanted to talk about the way you to mention terrible beauty. I found that the term terrible beauty to me seemed like the emergence and the progress of the Gothic style in art, because Gothic emerged as the different architecture that bring light into the churches, or it was different and it was about light. And then once it got to the Romantic era, it kind of changed into the pose kind of style of Gothic, which was dark, but also beautiful. So I found that your sense of terrible beauty is kind of in parallels with the Gothic form as well, which I really adored. And lastly, I wanted to mention, I love the way you use terms like westward or southwester, which is kind of a slang for shipping terms. And I've heard those words used a lot in shanties, which I really adore and love. And I wanted to ask if any shanties or music inspired you to create any art. So that's my 3 comments and questions to you, Chris.
Great, thank you. It's funny that you mentioned the shanties, because I have a teenager who loves sea shanties, and this was strange to me. This is an old form I would never have imagined, but they have been playing for me. Many contemporary young artists making sea shanties, even new shanties.
It really boomed on TikTok last year, and it continues to do so in people's ears.
It's so weird, but it's kind of wonderful. I think they're great. But no, I hadn't really done anything that none of that had come before the series. The series began in 2016.
Yeah.
So it was pre-revival of the sea shanty, but but if I had, but I have started making music on my own to actually have a side project making music, and it's an instrument. It's electronic music, and it's instrumental. I mean, it's synthesized, and it's dark ambient music, and I think it could correspond pretty well with some of the paintings that I'm making. It's the same feeling of sort of spaciousness and atmosphere. So I think that's an interesting line of thought. Think about music. I don't know if you are familiar with Claude Debussy. He's 19th century French composer, and he's been called a kind of impressionist because he used music to evoke states of mood. You know him?
Mm-hmm.
And he has there's that big symphonic piece called La Mer, which is the ocean, the sea. And there's some beautiful beautiful passages in that where the music seems to roll and swell like the waves of the ocean. It's great. I've always loved Debussy, and I think it's just I'm attracted to that kind of music that creates mental imagery, but that it's also non-concrete at the same time. It simply moves through the emotions and through the sort of abstraction of acoustics. I just love that form of music, ambience.
Thank you. Yeah, it's lovely to hear that you dabble in music as well.
And about the 19th century idea of the Gothic, yeah, I totally am also a fan. I've always been a fan of the Gothic strain in art and literature. And I definitely think that my doing this series has a lot to do with having looked at a lot of earlier Gothic art and Gothic, prints and etchings. I love the work of Piranesi, but also Caspar David Friedrich, the painter, and his abandoned monasteries. And also, I love the work of Odilon Redon, another French artist who had a whole series of lithographs that are black and white and very Gothic, very much like dreams and visions. So if you don't know Odilon Redon, you should check him out.
I will, thank you.
So there's that. So the other term that we could talk about is the sublime, and that's that notion of 19th century beauty as terrible and the world as threatening. And it would be interesting to think about, you know, a continuation of the sublime in contemporary art too, because I think that exists. But art critics don't like these terms anymore because they're so 19th century. They're so passé. You have to be very conceptual now. So,
well, there's always time for revivals. As we always see.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Yes, please.
Thank you for sharing your lovely arts and inspirations. It was really great. And when I saw that you created art with color, all of a sudden, Carl Sandburg's poem Chicago came up with. I remembered him celebrating, appreciating city life, urban life. I don't know if you remember his poem or not. In Chicago, he glorifies the city. What we suffer now, what you remember as a part of suffer from your childhood, is something that he glorifies. When I saw the images of factories or tar made of in the place that you live nearby, is something that he in 1900s was something that he glorified in the wake of industrialism. He was really happy to see something like that. Have you ever thought of responding to his poetry that he glorified urbanization and city life? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. I actually have a background in poetry. I got a master's degree in writing poetry. And so poetry is very close to my heart and my sensibility. And I know Carl Sandburg, and I know that poem that you're referring to. And it is wonderfully critical of the city and the dark sort of messy industrialism of the 19th century and early 20th century too. And I think we need more poetry like that. It's things like Carl Sandburg and Melville, they're classics, and they're called timeless, but not because they know time. Really, it's because they're perpetually always timely again, always have meaning for us. The classics, that's how you know a classic. Its meaning changes, but it's always relevant. It's always important for each generation. And I absolutely think we need more people paying attention to poetry these days. There's not a lot of poetry being taught in our schools, not enough anyway, here in the US at any rate. But yeah, I love that comparison, that soot, the grittiness, the dirtiness of the industrial world in Chicago, and the grittiness of whaling and how industrial that process was. I mean, there's definitely a tie together there. Any other questions, anybody?
Yes, I'd like to ask a question. First, I would like to congratulate you on the work that you did with the students. And
Thank you.
These are people who are professionally used to dealing with linear texts, and you have appeared and turned around their lives. They're now using visual texts to express themselves. I think that is amazing, just amazing. So thank you, and I congratulate you. Also, I would like to congratulate you on your artwork. But just one question. To me, tar is related to asphalt. Asphalt is related to land and industrialism because it's how urbanization is made. The roads are made. Also, the word tarmac used in airports still. So what was in your mind when you use only marine images and use material tar to paint them? How could you relate them? Is the material tar used on ships? Perhaps the boards are covered with it in some way for insulation or something, but what made you relate them together?
It's funny you say that, because the way I thought of using the tar was a very roundabout way of just kind of occurred to me. But the association of tar with pavement is very apt for me too, because having grown up on Long Island, everything is paved. And as a child growing up, as a teenager growing up, I saw the tar. I saw roads as a metaphor for the loss of nature, because, like you say, it's literally what we do to the ground when we want to develop it and build on it. And so when I said, so the first, here's the thing. When I was reading Moby Dick and I read that passage about the Spouter Inn, and I envisioned the painting of the ship that I wanted to make, of the ship in a big storm, I went online and I looked to see if other people had ever made a painting like based on that same passage from Moby Dick. And some people had, but I also found people talking about what 19th century artists might have inspired Melville to make that passage. And so Turner came up, and I showed the parallel between Turner's painting of the steamship and Melville's description at the Spouter Inn painting. But what I didn't mention is that another artist who came up on Google as somebody who might have painted like that ship painting in Melville's description is Ryder, Albert Pinkham Ryder. And Ryder, in fact, was born in New Bedford, where Moby Dick, where Melville set that chapter of Moby Dick in New Bedford, a city in Massachusetts, was the capital of whaling when Moby Dick was published. And I had been reading about Albert Pinkham Ryder separately, just by chance, and I had understood that he used tar in his paintings because some 19th century painters employed what they called it asphaltum to their shadows, to make a depth of darkness, a transparent darkness in their shadows. And apparently Ryder had used tar a lot in his paintings, and it was being blamed as one of the reasons that Albert Pinkham Ryder's paintings deteriorated over time, because he used so much tar and he didn't use any dryers. And it's since been proved that that isn't true, but it was believed for a long time that Ryder's paintings deteriorated because he used so much tar. Not true, but it was in my head. So when I saw Ryder come up as somebody who might have painted the Spouter Inn painting, I made the connection between the tar and the painting. And I decided to use the tar as a way of had nothing to do with climate change at that point, or fossil fuels. That was not in my mind at all. It was just because 19th century painters, and in particular, Albert Pinkham Ryder, who is a hero of mine anyway, use tar. It made me think I'm going to use tar to make this painting. But as soon as I opened the can, I smelled it. I was back on Long Island. It was the streets. It was the tar on the sticking to my feet in the summer from all of when the sun bakes the roads, it gets molten again. And like when they put it down, and you smell that smell of the tar that they're using to pave the roads. So summer sometimes smells like that. And so I smelled it. And I said, oh my God, I know this is tar that they put on the ground when I grew up in Long Island. This is amazing. And that fed into the whole project. So it's a very good question. And aside, it's a complicated, a little answer, and that's why I don't always usually say it all, because it's a lot to a lot of logical steps to follow. But that is my experience, and I thought it worth recounting the story because of your question was so spot on. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And other questions or comments?
Beautiful.
Okay. I would like to add one more thing regarding darkness and light. From the earliest antique songs to biblical stories of creation, as we all know, before light there was darkness, and out of Chris's work we may all hope darkness looms the light. Thank you, Chris, for your contribution to our symposium. And so we close the session. Thanks for your participation, dear guests. And thank you, Chris. Do you want to add one more thing, Chris? Or
I just wanted to say thank you also for having me, and how rewarding it has been to work with you on this project. It's just been great to see all of the interest in this and all of the great work that's come out of it. It's a real privilege to work with you with this. So thank you. Thanks for having me.
same for us. Thank you.
Before we take all of it to a close, may I read you a short poem?
Levent, of course. Go on.
Thank you. I call this one the Requiem. There was stood a height at a dream. In the desert, like a lake it seemed, artificially deep within imagined, a recreation yet to be created. The ideal image floats upon a sea of wishes and hopes. Toss a coin down the drain and see if it still echoes. Piece by piece my heart sung, let this requiem play through, till the soul is out of the lungs, a funeral of which must ensue. One last look at the memories, some waited too long to happen. Secrets between myself and I, some said to be heresy.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you, Levent.
Thank you.
That is our
Very fitting ending. Perfect. Thank you so much.
poet of Department of American Culture and Literature, and we are so proud of Levent. Thank you, Levent.
Thank you.
Fabulous.
So precious to us. Okay. Then it's time to farewell. But hopefully in the following months, Chris and I will be meeting again for other projects based in other scholars in New England. So there is no end to our meetings, it seems so, Chris. So I will see you
Good.
soon.
Excellent. Excellent.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Here.